This is Mike Guardia, and you are watching the Break It Down show.
And you are a machine. You write books. Matter of fact, when you were on the show, I mean, it seems like just a few weeks ago. Really, it
Uh-huh.
was. You had finished up another book,
Right.
and you're like, and the other one's on the way, and here it is, Danger
Uh,
Forward, written by Mike Guardia, and it's about this general named Paul F. Gorman. And you guys can get that. Here's the link for that book if you guys decide to get it. Mike always comes on because you write incredible things. You take these people that we ought to know about, or these units, or these battles, or whatever it is, and you're like, this is interesting. And so you're this. I don't know. How would you? I mean, okay, historian, author, great, but
right.
how do you characterize what it is that you do? Because you fill a very specific and, as far as I can tell, undiscovered niche.
Right. So, really, what I try to do, I think if I found a word to describe myself, it would be historian slash storyteller. Because really, what I want to try and do is I want to try and take some of the broader themes of history and put it against the backdrop of what the human element is. I really want to tell these narratives that are driven by the human element, where you're hearing it directly from the source, and really just showing and painting a broad picture of what the spirit of man can accomplish when the chips are down and the odds are stacked against you, and how these historical narratives play into the personal fabric of the lives of the people who are making them happen. So, yeah.
You have Paul Gorman here.
Right.
How did he drop into your lap?
All righty. So let's see. If we wind the clocks back to about 2014, I think that's when I first came across the name Paul Gorman. I actually came across his name when I was researching the book that I wrote on Don Starry. Paul Gorman's name popped out among the many intellectual giants that I discovered who played a role in rebuilding the Army in the wake of the post-Vietnam malaise. And, I was fascinated by a lot of the things that he did when he was with the U.S. Army's Training and Doctrine Command, but I never bothered to dig any deeper as to what he did beyond those handful of years that he was with TRADOC. And fast forward to about 2018, when I was doing a presentation at the Colin Powell Leadership Academy in Minneapolis, the professor of military science, he said, "Mike, I read your book on Don Starry. Let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of Paul Gorman?" And I said, "Yeah, matter of fact, I very distinctly remember his name because, I came across it as I was doing the research for Crusader." And he said, "Well, Mike, there's so much more that he did beyond his role at TRADOC. Let me tell you about a few of the things that he's accomplished in his lifetime." And then he went through the entire narrative to say, okay, well, here is a 1950 West Point graduate, okay? And he fought in the hilltop battles of North Korea. Then he was also the commander of American forces at Bong Trang. And not only that, he stayed in the military after the war. He did all these great things with TRADOC. He was the commander of Southcom when we were actively supporting the Contras in Nicaragua. And he also served on the Paris Peace Delegation and was the principal architect of the infamous Pentagon Papers. And I'm taking this all in, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, how come I never heard about any of that? I got to meet this guy, and I got to write this book.
And is he still with us? The general?
He is. As a matter of fact, just this year he turned 94, and he is just sharp as a tack. I mean, he is healthy as a horse, and he's still living his best life.
I love it. There's this whole the Korea era vets,
Right.
whether they served in World War II and then hung around for, not long at all, right? Like 5 years.
Uh-huh.
All of a sudden they're redeployed into another nasty fight. But we don't have Vietnam has a lot of passion around it. World War II for sure. It's the greatest story in human history, basically. But why is it that Korea kind of falls by the wayside? Why do people like Paul, who don't do all these incredible things, why does it take so long for them to get recognized?
Well, I think in a lot of ways they tend to call Korea the Forgotten War because it really found itself sandwiched in between two very passionate conflicts. It's pretty much, as you said, on the one, it's pretty much between the two bookends of World War II and Vietnam. On the one end, you have World War II, which is really a go-to for all people who are interested in military history. And I think it's pretty much like you said, World War II, that is the greatest story in human history, of how we took the most destructive conflict ever and used it to defeat the forces of fascism. And then on the other hand, you have what was probably the most catastrophic war effort in American history to that point. And you have on one end with World War II a lot of lingering positive feelings, but then on Vietnam you have a completely different story where there's a lot of resentment. So when you have those two competing emotions on either side of the geopolitical spectrum, the conflict in the middle that tends to get forgotten is Korea. And it's like, okay, well, Korea, that was 3 years. We didn't really call it a war. It was a police action, and it ended in a draw. Both sides claimed victory. We went back to the status quo antebellum, and when those veterans came home, they were pretty much ignored. And yeah, I think it really just gets lost in that metaphysical shuffle there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And then someone like Paul, who grows up, he's a teenager during World War II. His brain is fully on. He understands what's happening. Obviously, graduating in 50, he is fully aware of the Korean conflict. And it sounds like he goes to other conflicts, goes to Vietnam.
Right.
His entire life, he's known this war pace.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go into and I'll call it a lull, because there were no major deployments. I mean, sure, we had Grenada and South America, but how does a guy like that transition properly into something else besides just these multinational deployments where we go and trench up and shoot?
Well, for him, I think it was a chore, but he told himself, okay, well, if we're not actually trading bullets and we're not actually trading bombs, then the onus is on me to try and find a construct where we are handling these national security problems below the threshold of where we can send conventional forces. And I think that was really the big driving factor for how he approached his job at Southcom, because he said, okay, if I take a look at the entire area of responsibility that has been assigned to me at Southcom, I have everything from the southern border of Mexico all the way down to the tip of South America at Tierra del Fuego. And there is a lot of communist subversion going on. I have to deal with international drug cartels. I have to deal with communist guerrillas in El Salvador. I have to deal with the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. We have an ongoing love-hate relationship with Manuel Noriega. Argentina still hasn't recovered from the Falklands War. We got Augusto Pinochet in Chile, who is ruling that country with an iron fist. I got a lot of problems here, but the big thing for me to do is to try to keep the Cubans and the Soviets and the Nicaraguans from spreading their ideology by force. So how do I do that? Well, I can't necessarily pull triggers, but I can train up the indigenous forces to pull the triggers, and I can give them all of the tools and all of the techniques and tactics that they need in order to establish their own security. So I think in a broader sense, he saw his role as a facilitator and an advisor, and saying, if I can keep the lid on all of these anti-communist guerrilla campaigns and keep the lid on it to the point where it doesn't escalate into a high intensity conflict, then I say that I will have earned my paycheck.
All that stuff sounds super complex.
Yeah.
And you and I both know it's easier said than done. I mean,
Right.
The French and Indian War starts maybe because George Washington was a little bit crazy.
Right.
We recently had Michelle Black, who wrote a great book called Sacrifice about the Niger Mali ambush of that Special Forces team, that ODA. And look, that's just, you have not enough resources. You push people out. They're people that you're supposed to push out, and they ran out of luck. And on that day, it wasn't the beginning of anything, but just was a bad day. And so you have all these people trying to train the indigenous force and doing the whole FID mission, Foreign Internal Defense, for anybody listening. Those kind of missions where you're out there, that stuff can happen, and that stuff has to happen. I mean, at some point, somebody's going to run into somebody else or get caught too far out. How did he deal with all of those problems as well? Because, okay, you're trying to deal with Manuel Noriega, but all these other things, like any day, a car accident could ignite a war. These are hot spots.
They are
fuel everywhere.
Mm-hmm. It sure is. And it was a very delicate balancing act that he did for the better part of 3 years when he was in command of Southcom. And there are a few anecdotes that stand out to me. One of them was how he was going to provide assistance to the Peruvian Air Force. And this was a pretty interesting story in and of itself, because Peru was one of the countries in South America that had an ongoing friendship with both the U.S. and the Soviet Union. So here you have a potential international incident that could be percolating, and you have the Peruvian Air Force that has bought the standard Soviet attack helicopter. And while they have this Soviet helicopter that's in their inventory, they have purchased some FLIR night vision devices from the U.S. So when you have a night vision device, an airborne night vision device, no less, that is built in America, and you have a Soviet-built helicopter, it's going to take a lot of head work to sync those two up and adapt an American-made system to a communist-made platform. So the onus then on Paul Gorman and his team becomes, okay, well, how do we train the Peruvian Air Force pilots and the Peruvian Air Force technicians to properly employ this system without getting caught by any of the Soviet advisors who were dancing around all these Peruvian air bases? Because, you know, it's going to be quite an unpleasant incident, and the fallout is going to be pretty big if it makes headlines that an American air technician was caught by a Soviet advisor inside a Soviet helicopter trying to install an American system in it. So how they worked their way around a lot of situations like that was they had to do a very big intelligence campaign. Anytime they went into any one of the Latin American partner countries, they had to say, okay, well, what times are the Soviet advisors awake? What times are they asleep? What times are they the most busy throughout the day? What times are they going to enter into their rest cycles? Is there anything that we can do on our end to try and distract the Soviet advisors? Maybe we have a Peruvian mole who says, oh, hey guys, look over here. I'm having this particular trouble on this particular airfield. Can you please send your advisors to, you know, take care of this made up problem? And while they're over there, while they're over there trying to deal with that issue, okay, you have an American team over here in this Peruvian hangar who is, you know, doing a Johnny on the spot crash course of how to integrate this American night vision system into a Soviet made platform. So it was really a game of cloak and dagger, and trying to do everything either while the Soviets were sleeping or while they were otherwise preoccupied. And yeah, that is that very delicate balancing act, and how to time those operations just right in order to avoid being detected. That was a typical day for Gorman's team in Southcom, running those black ops.
Yeah. I want to go back to Gorman. If you look on Wikipedia, Gorman's entry, there's nothing there. It's like a paragraph or two. It doesn't even have all his awards, you know?
Right.
Like, it's like, oh, Army Commendation Medal. Not even like how many Oakley. Like, no one knows who this dude is. And yet it seems like he was widely recognized as being a fantastic warrior while he was in the Army, right?
Absolutely, he was.
What happened? How come he's just so unknown?
Well, you know, I think that is a fate that befalls a lot of American generals and a lot of American innovators within the military. You know, you have one or two key personalities who will make headlines in any given year or within any given conflict. But you know, for every handful of American leaders who make headlines in one battle or one conflict or another, you have at least 24 more who are showing just as much competence and just as much valor and just as much know-how, and they are making things happen and having a long-lasting impact on the future of military operations. But you know, their stories, they for one reason or another, you know, they just don't get told. And I think that's a travesty. And kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about what drives me to write all these stories, a lot of it is what I've just described. You know, if there's somebody out there who has had such a profound impact and nobody knows who they are, I in that sense, I take it on as a duty. Okay, I have to get this story out there, and I have to let the broader reading public know that this is someone who really deserves to have their story told.
As you write all these books, and I always compliment you on being prolific, but it is really remarkable how much, like, this is what your job is, right? And so you're like, this is what I do. But there are so many books. At some point, you have to do a big volume history, kind of putting it all together too, don't you? I mean, because you're not just learning about Paul, you're learning about multi-decades of conflict, and then you have this guy and how more. I mean, all these different people. At some point, you're going to have to back off and just do, you know, Guardia's history of American conflict from 1950 to 2000 or something, right? Or
Now that's a good idea.
you're welcome. I'm your book agent. I'm like your biggest fan.
Okay.
But for real though, I mean, do you feel like at some point you'll have to press pause and just write something that kind of puts it all together?
Well, I've toyed around with a few ideas like that. I at some point in time to make contributions to the American military textbooks and put it within the perspective of how all of these battles are part of the broader American foreign policy and how they dovetail into all the different world events that have happened from this particular point up until the present day. I think that if I can put a human element to that, then yeah, it would be time well spent.
When you talk about South America, you're talking about, especially during his era, but throughout, I mean, our lifetimes, there is a ton of CIA involvement. Anytime the CIA is somewhere, the FBI is there, the DEA. I mean, we're still dealing with cartels there in Mexico now instead.
Right.
But I mean, whoever who has American command over that area is definitely looking at Mexico going, fentanyl's destroying Americans left and right. It's coming from China. It's going in through Mexico. Mm-hmm. But what can you do? Like, you're not just going to, I mean, I want to be careful what I say here. You could put an American brigade on the other side of the river at El Paso and just say, it's not moving until you guys calm the hell down. But who's going to do that,
Right. Yeah, it is an incredibly complex environment, and it's one that has the potential for a lot of political backlash. I mean, yeah, I am not one to think that politics and political backlash should dictate the course of what American military operations should be. I think that the overall objective should be security and doing what's right for the country. But Pete, it is pretty much just how you said. You can't put a brigade there in El Paso. As a matter of fact, I was stationed at Fort Bliss only a few years ago when all of what you just talked about was reaching center mass, when we were starting to put actual forces on the border. And as a matter of fact, the JTF North headquarters was quite literally 2 blocks from where my unit was. And yeah, it is a problem that is not going away anytime soon.
And for those that don't understand, it's not far. I mean, the border is El Paso and to Juarez south of there. It's minutes from Bliss, just minutes. And so you have this thing, but sure, there's a military base there, and that requires some attention from someone who wants to do something adversarial, but you can go 150 miles east on the border in Texas and there'll be nothing out there for miles and miles. It's a very complex environment. How does someone like Paul deal with that? Like that? I mean, he didn't have Mexican command over Mexico, but in general, how does he deal with these problems where people from his region are going up through Mexico and infiltrating? I mean, Colombia had, we've had a number of drug traffickers on recently, right? These are all problems that a commander of that region is like having to announce, like, hey, this is what we're trying to do about this. But again, like, it's just only so much you can do, because you can't just put a division in Colombia.
Right. Yeah. So one of the ways that he tried to combat the problems in Central America was using a lot of redundant reconnaissance assets. And, this is actually something that I learned very on in the military in my education, particularly in the armor cavalry world. We tend to call this redundancy of observation. We try to put as many passive observation assets on a particular problem at one time that will feed us as much real-time information as we can get in order to assess what a threat is and try to make our decisions based off that information. And one of the things that stood out to me, and one of the things that he said was incredibly effective, he said that there were 2 things really. He said, one, we had aerial reconnaissance assets at key points throughout each one of the Latin American borders. We had these reconnaissance assets that were patrolling the Pan American Highway. And he said just putting those assets in the air made for a real-time observation system that interdicted a lot of drug traffic. And he said another thing that previous Southcom personnel hadn't really counted on was trying to develop what was called a brown water Navy capability for each of the Latin American countries. And by brown water Navy, we're talking about a Navy that's more of a Coast Guard in its nature. It's more of a rapidly deployable Coast Guard that's designed to defend the territorial waters of a particular country, probably from anywhere from like 10 to 500 miles out. He said, when we do that, we will, we will be able to interdict and disrupt a lot of the Traficante network that's going down there.
What other kind of wisdom did he impart on you? Because I'm assuming you guys had some pretty extensive interviews.
Oh, we sure did. Sure did. The interview process lasted, I want to say, for a good 14 to 16 months. So,
wow.
Yeah. So there were so many good stories that he had to share. But the thing that really resonates with me more than anything that he told me was that is that anywhere he was, the first thing that he did was look for ways to solve a problem, and he wasn't afraid to think outside the box. He wasn't afraid to step on anyone's toes. He is the most gifted problem solver of anyone who I have ever spoken to. Just the way that he would deconstruct any of the situations that he was confronted with, that's really something that can't be taught. I don't think that's something that you can learn in a classroom. It's either something that you learn from experience, or you just have a foundational talent for it, and then it grows as your experience grows. But just the way that he was able to tackle these problems, and the way that he was able to find ways around any of the bureaucratic roadblocks that he was confronted with. I mean, that right there is brilliance, and that I think is the hallmark of any leader.
That problem-solving ability, again, this is more for the audience than for you. That problem-solving ability, especially if you've got 4 stars in your shoulders, it gets to be hard because you need your people to do that, to present you with a problem that, this is a division level problem. This is a major command level problem. This is not a battalion level problem. And so how do you provide the solutions as a leader so that you can get that solution down to the bottom as quickly and as efficiently as possible without micromanaging? Because look at a general who's above generals, they're so high up in command, they don't pick up a shovel and move dirt. They sort of manage that process.
Yeah.
How does someone like that do that though? How does he learn to do that from a guy who's in Korea, probably with a shovel in his hand, helping to dig and leading by example, and then transitioning to someone who can't lead by example because you're not supposed to do that work. It's somebody else's job.
Right. Well, I think one of the ways that he did that was really empowering his subordinates. He said, okay, from my perch here, whether I am a division commander, whether I'm in command of a major geographical combatant command, he said, it's always important on me to gather the best team that I can. That's why, that's why he was very particular in picking the members of his select staff when he was at Southcom. He said, okay, I'm going to do a by name request for each of these gentlemen. And the reason why I'm picking them out is because I know they bring the exact type of experience and the exact type of expertise that I need in order to have a functioning command group. So he reaches out and he says, okay, Bert Otero, you are a guy who is 100% fluent in Spanish. You grew up in Puerto Rico. You have flown combat missions in Vietnam. You are aware of the cultural tidings that are dictating each one of these Latin American operations. I want you in my staff. And then he goes off to say, okay, Bert Clover, you are another person that I want to have on my staff because I did time with you when I was doing the operations research and statistical analysis work at TRADOC. So I know that you have a mind that is geared towards data. I know that you have a mind that is geared toward numbers. This is what I need, and this is how I need you to quantify all the different operations and metrics that we're going to need in order to make our Southcom operation successful. And then he says, okay, well, I need someone who is familiar with seaborne operations. So Paul Malstead, you're going to be my guy. You're going to be my Navy inside guy. I need your expertise on how to do these amphibious operations. I need your expertise on how to do any of these shipborne systems that I have in mind. So just going through that calculus and that process of vetting all the people that he needed, that he knew he needed in order to make a successful team, That's how he was able to, keep the ball rolling and keep the success going forward of, trying to keep South America as stable and as free from communism as he possibly could.
I think it's important to note that he became who he was during a time of joint and combined military becoming a thing. So, I mean, he had to learn how to do that. What was his background education wise after graduating from college? What did he do and what did he write on?
Right. So, yeah, he got a crash course in joint operations, largely as a function of the service school system that he was put through. When he graduated from West Point in 1950, pretty much all he knew at that point was the Army, and
Right.
his experiences in Korea were pretty much strictly Army experience. There was very little crosstalk or cross-loading with any of the sister services. But then you fast forward to 1955, 1956, and he gets thrown into the Marine Corps Junior School, which is the equivalent of the captain's course that our Army officers go through today. And he had virtually no experience with the Marine Corps, had only a very superficial knowledge of how they conducted their operations. But he got to see how the other half lives and how the other half conceptualizes these concepts of warfare. And he said, okay, well, it's interesting to see how exactly the Marine Corps does it and what their approach is. Here's how they see amphibious operations. Here's how they see airborne operations. Well, guys, this doesn't exactly dovetail with my experience in the Army, but let me give you my 2 cents worth so we can have this two-way learning experience. And that gets played forward when he goes to the National War College, and also when he does a lot of crosstalk with the Navy research labs in trying to bring some technical assets into the Army's fold. So, at all these critical junctures throughout the 1950s to the early 1970s, he has these cross-pollinating experiences with each of these sister services, and they are each teaching him something about how to conduct warfare, and they're learning stuff from him at the same time.
That's, that's the idea right there, right? Like,
Right.
Start to mix these things in, and then the coalition piece must come in later on. Because again, Marines, okay, that sounds normal, but a brown water Coast Guard force being deployed a couple of decades later. I mean, we're a long way from there because the Coast Guard wasn't that force in the 50s. And then what about the coalition side, trying to bring in, hey, we have all these, French aviators that are going to support our operation. That he's got to be inventing a lot of this in real time as he's commanding or working on staff for someone who commands a unit that has that capacity.
Absolutely, he is. And as a matter of fact, that was one of the things that he touched on with Southcom. He said, one of the things that was really a challenge for us was trying to build up the Air Force capabilities of all of these Latin American nations, because when you looked at the overall shape of what these Latin American Air Forces were doing, it almost broke your heart because they were decades behind where we think they should have been. If you take the Dominican Republic, for instance, in 1979, their Air Force pilots were still flying P-51 Mustangs, and also in places like Panama and also in places like El Salvador, they were flying these World War II vintage aircraft, and they only did one night qualifying flight per year.
Wow.
And that was barely enough to maintain their proficiency. So he said, we did have to invent a lot of it as we went along. We had to invent these night training programs for them. We had to teach them how to, if we couldn't sell them planes directly, we had to arrange some foreign military sales for them, and we had to teach them how to adapt their own forces to defend themselves against anything like a Cuban MiG or any type of aggressor aircraft that would, generally speaking, outperform anything that they could throw at it.
Right. The book is called A Danger Forward. It's about this guy right here, Paul Gorman, and I love it. And here's the link just to get the book. If you guys go onto Amazon and use that link, you'll kick back some money for the show. And as always, subscribe to the show on YouTube. Helps me out. I wanted to get back into the thing about Paul, because as I'm reading through this book, I realized I was like, okay, that's pretty damn cool. I have two-part question.
Okay.
And then you're reading through, and at some point I'm like, come on. I mean, like, how many careers did this guy have in his career? It seems like it was like, and then this completely redefined who he was, and then this incredible thing happened, and like it just the and thens just kept going. So, what does he consider the best? I mean, look, anybody who goes into combat, it's going to define a lot of what your career is, but most of your career is not going to be combat. So, what did he think was the pinnacle of what he did or who he became? And then, what are your thoughts on how dense his career is with just incredible event after incredible event?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's see. I think if I had to zero in, and I think if there was one thing that he could point to as the defining moment in his career, I think that would be his service in Vietnam. And that actually includes both combat tours that he served in Vietnam, because, it was America's most unpopular war to that point, at least. And the public opinion was turning savagely against the war. But at both points within his multiple tours of duty, he was not only to effect positive change, but he was also able to take units that had lower states of morale and turn them into very high performing units, while trying to get a grasp on a nature of warfare that we had never really considered before. This was the counterinsurgency environment. This was the environment where the front lines had disappeared, and the enemy was elusive and could very well easily be at your front, rear, or on your flanks. So the fact that he was able to motivate those units and inspire them and turn them into high-performing outfits while fighting a war that was very unpopular at home against an enemy we had very little experience fighting against, I think really is just nothing short of incredible. And that would probably be one of the things that he would latch on to as being a defining moment in his career.
What did he think about the modern wars? Because we're talking about counterinsurgency. We tend to believe, at least right now, that they are counterinsurgency type fights. But what are his thoughts?
Right. So let's see. That actually dovetails into how dense his career was. Because he says that one of the problems that the Army has traditionally had is that they train very hard to fight the last war, and that they tend to look backwards instead of looking forwards. And he said that, when we wrapped up Vietnam, there was a strong trend in the military to think that counterinsurgency had become passé, and that we had to focus exclusively on fighting these high intensity conventional wars, most likely on the plains of Europe. But he said, look, history really does not bear that assumption out. So what I want to try to do when I go forward and I, make all of these new training concepts, and I make all these new training programs within the training and doctrine command, I want it to be within the framework of saying, okay, let's not just prepare for another high intensity conflict. Let's not forget about counterinsurgency. Let's not forget about training indigenous forces to take on their own security apparatus, because even though Vietnam was unpleasant, it's not outside the realm of possibility that we might find another war like that sometime in the near future. Let's keep our conventional assets strong for sure, but let's not forget that, in the ever-changing nature of warfare, asymmetric warfare, unconventional fights are going to be part of our future fighting capability, whether we like it or not. And, it's also kind of ironic because, in the same breath, he was telling me that he foresaw a tactical environment that would not only be unconventional, but would also be network centric, that there would be a growing cyber threat capability as modern technology progressed at the pace that it was at the time.
Yeah, that's crazy to be predicting cyber war, and we're on the frontier of it now, even though it's well established, and where it's going to be in 20 years, it's going to be crazy.
Right.
When you look at someone like Paul, who's done all of these incredible things, is he kind of Forrest Gumpian, where he ends up in the right place at the right time, or was he always like this guy? At West Point, was he, the adjutant and all these, was he always out in front of his people? Was he always this thinker? Or how did he become this dude who just gets it and can see the future?
Well, I think a lot of it is his natural born intellect. And I also think that, it was the right combination of being well prepared, taking initiative, and having good luck. And he wasn't afraid to buck the system, and certainly wasn't afraid to bend a few rules in order to accomplish his objectives. One anecdote that I can provide for all of our viewers out there is exactly how he got to the front lines of Korea, because back in 1952 he was a young lieutenant fresh out of the infantry officer basic course, and he really wanted to go to Korea, but every single graduating lieutenant in his class ended up on bulk orders to Germany. And he said, Germany is about as far away from the action as you can get. I don't want to go to Germany. I don't want to do tours along the Iron Curtain. I want to go where the action is. I want to go to Korea. So he said, okay, very secretively, I'm going to disobey the order. Not going to say anything. I'm just going to put my derriere on a train out to Camp Stoneman in San Francisco. I'm going to show up at Camp Stoneman, and that was the that was the primary replacement center for soldiers going in and out of Korea. Goes up to the adjutant at Camp Stoneman and says, "Hi, my name is Paul Gorman. I am supposed to be on orders to Korea." And the adjutant looks at his clipboard and says, Gorman, I don't see your name anywhere on my manifest. Are you sure you have orders to go here? And Paul Gorman said, yeah, of course I do. You know what? Here, I'm going to get on the phone with the Pentagon, the actual personnel office at the Pentagon, and I'll see what the problem is. I'll have them send my orders over. So he goes to a payphone or whatever it is, picks up the phone, gets on the horn with the chief of personnel at the Pentagon and says, hi, my name is Paul Gorman. I'm here at Camp Stoneman right now. That's where I'm calling you from. I'm supposed to have orders to Korea, but the Camp Stoneman personnel don't have my orders. Can you send them over? And the guy on the other end is thinking to himself, well, gosh, I don't know what could have caused this snafu. Hey, don't even worry about it. We'll send your orders right over. He hangs up the phone. Then he goes back over to the adjutant at Stoneman and says, hey, yeah, I just got off the phone with the chief of personnel. They said that they're going to send my orders right over. And the adjutant says, I just got off the phone with the Pentagon too, and they told me the exact same thing. They said, hey, sorry for the slip up, but they're going to get your orders right over.
I love it.
And it wasn't even a week later that he was on the ship to go to the front lines of Korea. And he told me, he said, Mike, the Army was probably well aware of what I was doing, and they were well aware of this ruse, but you have to remember, it was 1952, and it was so rare to find somebody who wanted to go to Korea. No questions were ever asked.
Right.
So
well, and there's also that thing with the presumptive orders, like, hey, I was told,
Yeah.
I mean, I showed up similarly unannounced, but on orders, but no one knew because it was during the holiday quiet time at Huachuca. Right. And for those that don't know, during in training units and training posts, most of the post is half of it is not even working half of the time because because you're not training warriors. And so I showed up, and just happened that I showed up on like nobody's here day except for the E4s, the specialists. Yeah. And it's Christmas break. And so I show up, and the guy's like, hey, who are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm a specialist Turner. I'm here. Here's my orders. And basically, I just had orders that took me to Huachuca, right? No pinpoint. And the guy's like, well, and Huachuca's my home. That's the spy school. So I went to the headquarters for where I thought I needed to be. And he's like, yeah, okay. And this is an E4 talking to an E4. He's like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to assign you to this unit over here, because once you're here, no one's going to take you out. Otherwise, guys like you will get assigned to this unit that doesn't do anything. He goes to the field all the time, and you don't want to do that. And so he snuck me in. And the hilarious part was, this is this presumptive thing on why this works for a guy like Paul and I. A couple months later, the sergeant major's like, boy, I fought hard to get you here. And I'm like, you were so full of shit. You had no idea I was coming, because I wasn't on the gaining roster. They hadn't even had time, because my orders were changed, and then I left on leave to go to Huachuca. So those things, I think it is, if someone had commented, how would that happen today? That's my buddy Dick. That can absolutely happen today. Like someone's like, oh shit, let me fix this. And they fixed a problem that they don't realize isn't really a problem. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
One of the things I loved about the book is later on, and he's this asset, And look, people must know who he is because, like, he had his guys. He must have been someone's guy because he kept getting like call, phone. Hey, by the way, you're gonna go whatever. In this case, to the CIA, which was I love that story about how he found out about it from a German paper.
Right.
And he's like, what? And then the guy, his boss, calls him and he's like, hey, and totally right. Like if in the book, Mike tells a story about how he finds out that he's in the CIA now. He's still in the Army, but he's going to be like an Army attachment. And he's like, how come I didn't find out about this? How come this guy's saying he's calling me? How come we're not doing this via classified channels? All these how comes were all normal. But how come this guy gets picked for this? And then, yeah, I mean, what a crazy assignment. And he says it's one of his favorite throughout his entire career.
It is. It is. The Army really only looks big from those who are on the outside looking in. Once you get into the Army, you really start to realize just how small it is. And I mean, it is a very tight-knit community. And the higher you rise in the ranks, the more everybody at that level tends to know you. And it really only goes to show that if you have a solid if you have a solid track record of performance, then as all of these taskings tend to pop up, they're like, well, just a few years back, I was in Vietnam with this one fella. His name was Gorman. And I got to tell you, this is a brilliant tactician. He's a very out of the box thinker. This is the guy that we need to have. This is the guy that we need to have on the front lines of whatever project is coming up. And once you get past the 0506 level, that's really how a lot of those assignments tend to play out. I've noticed because having served in a brigade headquarters myself, it becomes more a function of who knows who and who can point to whatever accomplishment is in your ORB.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that with that is he's not really serving a full tour in a lot of these cases. Then he just gets tasked like so much for orders. He goes to the new place, he goes to the CIA, and it's like, and then he gets there, and I love this. He's like, well, there's nothing for me to do here. I guess I'll just write some papers or whatever. And that's also the Army, right? Like, we have this important role, and you get there and they're like, here's your office. Have a nice day.
Yeah. It's like, go read a field manual. So
yeah. But I mean, what was his job then at the CIA? I mean, I know he wrote those papers, but what was his job ultimately? Like, what did he invent for himself?
Well, so on paper, his job was to be a military advisor to the CIA, and he was supposed to advise CIA operatives and decision makers on what important military taskings and what important military affairs were going to be affecting the course of American involvement wherever the CIA was going to be sending its personnel, either for intelligence gathering operations or what have you. So he was supposed to be the all resource advisor in that regard. But as he said, in practice, what he ended up doing was sitting in his very nice corner office and writing papers about whatever important topics there were on national security. Papers that were so well put together, as a matter of fact, that he was given two literary awards by the CIA. And it's ironic because I will never forget when he told me the story, because they give you an award and then a friend of a friend of a friend tells something to the inspector general and says, oh, well, we appreciate your hard work, but that's actually against regulation subparagraph 3 of, subsection A or whatever. And you actually can't get that award. It was given to you, in violation of whatever regulation. And Paul says, what? He says, yeah, because you weren't actually assigned to the CIA. And he says, no, I was assigned to the CIA. I still got a copy of my orders right here, buddy. I had an office. I had my derriere in the seat, and I was working for the CIA. But they said, no, it's actually a technicality. You weren't assigned to the CIA. You were detailed to the CIA, and you actually belong to the Department of Defense. So you can't accept this award, and you have to give back your prize money.
Yeah.
He's just saying, okay, I guess I can give it back. How are we going to do this? You're going to have to take it out of my paycheck or something. And sure enough, that's what happened. But it was such a big facepalm moment for Paul Gorman. And again, the only thing that kept resonating in my head as I was having that story related to me was, oh my God, that's like snafus that are invented out of thin air because of some silly bureaucratic interpretation of whatever reg is buried somewhere.
Yeah, and meanwhile, like whatever that prize was, let's say it's $20,000, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, right next to that, where that happens, there's someone literally just throwing 80 grand into the ocean over and over again. Something like, I remember we had someone had. So it's very common in Iraq for us to bring a thing called the radio in a box, the REAB, out, and we would use that to try to stabilize the region through radio. And it was a common program, so every unit would think they invented it, and they would bring the REAB. We got to bring out the REAB, and they would order it, and then it would disappear. Like, we don't know what happened to it. It was stolen. So it was totally fine, and no one cared if it was stolen because that's war. But if you said, hey, this thing's working, let's just give it to the Iraqis and let that governor use that to govern, they're like, whoa, that's Title IX money. You're like, oh, well, then someone stole it. It's gone. And they're like, no. You can absolutely have someone steal it. Nobody cares. No one's going to investigate it. It's just written off. But if you give it to your partnered nation ally, it's like, no, that's the kind of thing that Paul experienced with that award. But by the way, tell him the rate of repayment that he had to do.
Oh, yeah. So his rate of repayment was he had to take $10 out of his paycheck every month until all of the prize money was paid back. Yeah, $10 a month over like a course of 36 months.
Yeah. That's so ridiculous. And this is literally, it cost them more money to investigate this than it did. They could have just said, you know what? Never mind. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Well, and if no one presses charges, you're not in trouble. So
I guess
it's kind of crazy. You get to know these people really well. I mean, hours and hours of interviews.
Right.
What sticks with you about Paul?
Well, really, what stuck with me the most was just how incredibly down to earth he is. I mean, at the end of the day, all of these heroes that I've interviewed, all of these people who have done great things for the country, who have really proven themselves to be warrior scholars and to really rise to the occasion when the chips are down. At the end of the day, they are just the most down to earth people that you could ever hope to speak to. They're all very pleasant. They all have families that they're very close to. They are incredibly dedicated to their wives, to their husbands, to their children. You really get a sense that, hey, these are the good Americans. These are the type of people that we really need to be celebrating. And it has been an incredible pleasure for me, for any one of the remarkable people that I've interviewed, whether it's been Hal Moore, whether it's been Don Blackburn, whether it's been H.R. McMaster or Paul Gorman, is that at the end of the day, they are folks just like you and me, and they are regular old-fashioned American guys who want to build good memories with their family.
One of the things that strikes me about Paul when in reading through the book was people like him don't often survive their career, not because he wasn't excellent at what he did, but because he didn't say, let's get to the Fulda Gap with a bunch of Lursk guys in tanks. Like he would do other things. Yeah. And that often puts you on the outs with the institution as a whole.
Right.
How did he walk? Like, it's one thing to do that and retire as a colonel. Okay. Like that, not that crazy.
Okay.
But how did he do that and continue to get stars on his shoulder?
Right. So, I think a lot of it boiled down to two things. One is that he had a track record of producing good results every time he bucked the system. It's like, one of the things that I think saved him was that you can't argue with success. He said, yeah, I may have thought outside the box. I may have gone a little bit beyond the bounds of what was deemed to be acceptable protocol at the time. But by God, you cannot argue with the downstream effects of what I've produced.
Right.
So when he has those qualitative accomplishments that he can point to, and the fact that he has guys like Sid Berry and Bill Depew in his corner saying, hey, this is the guy who can get stuff done. Give him free reign of what he needs to do in order to solve the problem. I think that right there is the perfect storm that overrides a lot of the institutional reticence, if you will, to say, oh well, if this guy's not doing everything to a T the way the book answer says he should, then his name is mud, and let's just show him the door.
Well, and a lot of guys who are just as capable as Paul,
Mhm.
don't make it across that tightrope, because
Right.
those guys often are given jobs where, like, gosh, who are we going to get for this impossible job?
Mhm.
And sometimes impossible jobs remain impossible, and you're not
Right.
able to do it. So how much luck is in his success too? Because again, like, I know all kinds of colonels that are like,
Right.
and then this thing happened out of my control, and that was my career.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, I think a lot of times it does boil down to luck, because I mean, I can even tell you from my own experience, when I entered the armor officer basic course as a young lieutenant, I had so many capable lieutenants on my left and on my right, and these were all very talented men. These were all guys who were really dedicated. They were really gung ho about the mission, and for one reason or another, they either elected to leave the military or they just found themselves in a unit that was hamstrung by toxic leadership, and for one reason or another, they didn't continue on in their careers for those reasons. And I think of my original class, less than half of those young officers are still on active duty. And it's not always a function of how smart you are, how capable you are, but when you take that intelligence, you take that capability, you take that tenacity, and you put it in the circumstances where both luck and happenstance are in your favor, then yeah, you have a person who's in the right place at the right time to affect all those positive changes.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's just one of those philosophical things that I think any number of PhDs would have a field day with discussing. But yeah, it's a lot of it that I have witnessed. It's always a combination of two things. It's grit, it's a combination of three things: grit, determination, and intelligence. When those three things meet luck, you
Yeah.
have a successful career on your hand.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking today when I was thinking about what to talk to you about, about my own career in the military, and I wouldn't say I was a good or a bad soldier. I was like an unrealized soldier,
Mhm.
where I won every board I sat in front of. I was a max
Yeah.
PT guy, fired expert. I studied my ass off, correspondence courses. I had a degree, but um, nobody cared in my unit, and so you just sit there, and then hey, get this, when I was getting ready to go, it was time for me either to re-enlist or to leave. My commander never called me,
Mm.
like, too busy, and it's not a knock on him. It's just, that's how it is. He's running a battalion, I'm sure, say a battalion sized company, because you have trainers and students, and if you've got 1,000 students, 10% of them require a commander's attention almost every day,
Right.
So, but this is the thing, right? And so, and this is not about me. I'm just illustrating, like, you can have someone who's ready to do the next thing
Mhm.
and who's capable and hasn't even been fully, like, pushed forward yet. I mean, I was leaving with the master's degree because no one else in my unit would get one, right? And not even a, hey, what can we do to keep you in call.
Right.
By the time he called, I was like a month out from getting out of the army. And so the military stinks at this. They stink at recognizing, like, here's some people that, we spent all this money to train these lieutenants. We don't want them to leave a captain. What do we do? And I don't know, is that just a problem that doesn't need solving because the army can't be too big anyhow? Or what are your thoughts? How do you get better at recognizing and finding more Pauls?
Well, I think one of the biggest ways to correct that problem would actually start from the top down. And I say that in the sense that, if we were, or if the military collectively were to get better at handling and addressing and rooting out toxic leaders, that would take care, I think, of 95% of the retention problems that the military has. Because one of the things that I've written about, and one thing that I want to write about more in some of the future projects that I take on, is just how much toxic leadership can get out of control, and how for years and even decades on end, the military hasn't done much collectively to address toxic leadership. And and the toxic leaders that do survive and slip through the cracks don't really have an incentive to change their behavior because those control mechanisms aren't there.
Yeah.
And I think that if you put more accountability mechanisms in place to say that, okay, if there is a toxic command climate and there is an identified toxic leader, that there is a counseling and that there's a counseling process, a rehabilitation process, and even a punishment process if indeed there needs to be one, that if you put those systems in place, then that will take care of a lot of the leadership struggles that a lot of these younger soldiers, officers, and enlisted face on a regular basis. Because it was a poll that I read, and for the life of me, I can't remember where I read it. It may have been Coffee or Die. It may have been one of those veteran websites, but I don't remember. It said that a recent survey indicated that the number one reason that young officers choose to leave the military, and it also goes for young NCOs as well, that the number one reason they choose to leave is because they don't feel that the leadership cares, or that it just has to do with toxic leadership. It's like, why am I being micromanaged? Why are my leaders making mountains out of molehills? Why are they unnecessarily creating drama that doesn't exist? And why do I feel like they lack empathy? So,
right.
Yeah.
I want to plug the book one more time, but tell us next for you. What are you working on now? Because I know there's another book coming.
Oh, yes, sir. As a matter of fact, I got 3 projects in the hopper as of right now. So let's see. So the first one is a story called The Combat Diaries. And that is a collection of about 24 short stories, all told from the perspectives of the veterans who lived it. And The Combat Diaries is just a collection of all of these different veteran stories. Runs the gamut from men who were infantrymen to men who were pilots, or who were gunners on a B-17.